If you didn't like the Texans trading out of the first round in this year's NFL draft, avert your eyes. This mock draft might be your nightmare. Welcome into the channel. I'm Cody Stoots. Let's talk some Texans, and let's talk about one of the biggest concerns I have with the Texans trading out of the 23rd overall pick. Now, last week, they made the deal with the Minnesota Vikings. They move out of the first round, the Texans do, pick up a second-rounder this year from Minnesota, the 42nd overall pick, and a second-rounder next year from Minnesota, which should end up being somewhere in the 40s. But we're not worried about next year's pick. We're worried about the 2024 NFL draft. And this mock draft that Daniel Jeremiah put out on NFL.com that we're about to look at illustrates one of my criticisms about the trade. There's a lot of players at positions that the Texans either wouldn't draft early or wouldn't be focusing on in this draft that push good players down the board to the Houston Texans. So, offensive linemen. The Texans aren't drafting an offensive lineman in the first round. Okay, quarterbacks. The Texans don't need a quarterback. They've got C.J. Stroud. Even some of the top wide receivers coming off the board pushes other good players at other positions down the board, and maybe the Texans wouldn't take that swing at wide receiver in round one. Also, another position, cornerback. Yes, some corners would come off the board in this draft, but also some maybe could be still available for the Texans. So what could have been available at 23 is something that we will think about when it comes to this draft a ton. So let's take a look at what Daniel Jeremiah put together in the mock draft and what's available there at 23. So you see 23, the Arizona Cardinals have this pick. Okay, the Cardinals have this pick because the Vikings traded the 23rd overall pick to them. We're not worried about that trade. We're not worried about how good or bad the Vikings or the Cardinals are or anything like that. I guess we're kind of worried about the Vikings being bad. But looking at 23, so who's available 24 through 32 that would have been available in this mock draft universe for the Houston Texans? Well, we see right there at 22, one of the top corners, Nate Wiggins, came off the board. But let's scroll down a little bit. A center from Oregon, no thank you, not worried about it. A tackle from Georgia, no thank you, not worried about it. But boom, this is a player the Texans definitely could have used. Darius Robinson from Missouri. I know it says that he's an edge player, but Robinson has a ton of inside, outside versatility. He could play a little defensive tackle for the Texans. He could play a little defensive end for the Texans as well. But that's a player that certainly could be useful and would be useful. Maybe not the perfect fit with the 23rd overall pick, but certainly a player that could have been utilized by the Texans. And then at pick 27, that's the big one. Really what you're talking about with that trade out of the first round is a chance that you miss out on the top player or projected top player at certain positions. And when you start thinking about big-time defensive linemen and certainly big-time defensive tackles, Byron Murphy from Texas is the top interior pass rusher on the defensive line in this draft, according to most draft people. He is a scary individual. He does this thing, and Chris Sims coined it at NBC Sports. He calls it bleep it up plays, where he doesn't get a tackle for a loss. He doesn't get a sack. He doesn't even make the tackle, but he messed up the play so much for the offense that one of his teammates made the play, so he gets a bleep it up stat. Byron Murphy, maybe the king of the bleep it up stat in college football last year. This is a guy that here available at 27 in this mock draft by Daniel Jeremiah could have been taken at 23rd overall by the Houston Texans. Okay, another couple of players that are interesting. Jerzon, a.k.a. Johnny Newton, defensive tackle from Illinois. He's not quite as adept at the pass rush as a guy like Byron Murphy is, but certainly a name that's worth thinking about. Another name right here, Kool-Aid McKinstry from Alabama. Now, he's got some issues that he's got to get cleaned up before the season starts, which maybe led to him dropping a little bit in this mock draft. But McKinstry is a name the Texans should be thinking about. He could easily push Jeff Okudah for that second cornerback spot at some point in the 2024 season. Cooper DeJean, not a guy that I'm super interested in. I don't know that he has a true position. Is he a corner? Is he a safety? I don't know. Chop Robinson, I'm not super in love with Chop Robinson. I think the measurables and the production that he put together in the draft process is probably a little bit better than his actual on-field production, but there's certainly some potential to Robinson, and then boom, another big-time wideout comes off the board in Adonai Mitchell, A.D. Mitchell, as some people will call him, the dynamic wide receiver from the University of Texas. Now, look, there's some good players right there. I don't want you to think I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth here. There's definitely a scenario where really good players are available at 23 and beyond, and the Texans don't have a shot at those guys. I would also tell you this. If the Texans desperately desire Byron Murphy at, say, 27, like he was in this mock draft, A.D. Mitchell at 32, they have every bit of assets and capital to go up there and trade for the pick to select one of these guys. So Byron Murphy starts to slip, and all of a sudden the Texans want to make some moves, go up from, say, 42 using the Vikings next year's pick to go and get this guy. I certainly support that line of thinking, and they have the ability to do that. And in fact, Nick Caserio just this week, appearing on Sports Radio 610, said if they want to move up, they can move up. If they want to move around a little bit more, they have those assets. And again, Caserio has never been a stranger to making trades. We all know this. He moved around with his second first-round pick and moving around, getting off of an early teens pick to a mid-teens pick and picking Kenyon Green. He obviously moves around a ton in the second round with players like Nico Collins, John Mechie, Tank Dell, Juice Scruggs, Christian Harris, all being selections that he made after moving around to get that pick. So Caserio, if some of those players start to fall, certainly can move around to get one of those players. But if he doesn't want to do that and he wants to hang out and sit around and see if maybe a really good player drops to him at 42, which again, if the Texans view players from, say, 25 to 45 as kind of the same level of guy, then it doesn't make a lot of sense to move up for those players. I would also tell you, Nick Caserio would love to tell you, the draft is not about one player. So we talked about those players that come off the board, Adonai Mitchell, and Byron Murphy, and Kool-Aid McKinstry, and Brian Thomas Jr. I know he's a favorite of a lot of people. But, hey, wide receivers that are still available to the Houston Texans at the conclusion of the first round of Daniel Jeremiah's mock draft. How about Ladd McConkey from Georgia, one of my favorite wide receivers? Keon Coleman, who was a workout warrior at the combine with the drills, maybe not the actual athletic testing. Troy Franklin from Oregon, Xavier Worthy from Texas, Xavier Legette from South Carolina, Roman Wilson from Michigan, Ricky Purcell from Florida, Malachi Corley from Western Kentucky. I can go on and on and on. That's a lot of wide receivers. There's plenty of options there, and that's just wide receiver. At defensive tackle, Braden Fisk from Florida State still available. Tavondre Sweat, the big fella. They don't make them like Tavondre Sweat very often. He's still available as a guy that you can make a selection with in the second round. Okay, one of the top cornerbacks in this draft. I know he's not the same as some of these other guys, but Enos Rakestraw Jr. in this mock draft still available. So again, as I go through some of these players, yes, I do have concerns that a really, really, really good player is going to be there at 23. But I also see Nick Caserio's vision for, hey, at 42 or 38 if we need to move up a little bit, or 36 if we need to move up a little bit, those spots will still have players that the Texans have graded as pretty similar to the guys that maybe are there at 25, 26. I will tell you, I do like Byron Murphy a lot, and if he is there on draft night at 23, I will lament the trade just a tiny bit. It's also not only this mock draft about who the Texans don't get. I do want to spend a tiny moment on a couple of the players that end up in the division. Let's take a look at what the Titans, the Jaguars, and the Colts do in this draft. Joe Alt in Daniel Jeremiah's mock draft ends up as the Titans pick at 7th overall. He's supposed to be the best offensive lineman in this draft. I'd love to tell you a little bit about the O-lineman, but I knew the Texans weren't drafting a tackle anytime early in this draft, so I didn't do any homework or think about the offensive tackles at all. I just go off what the experts say. Joe Alt, one of the best tackles in this draft, ending up in the Texans division. That adds to the potential nightmare for some people. Let's go down to 15th overall for the Indianapolis Colts and 17th overall for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Oh, how about the two best cornerbacks in this entire draft ending up in the AFC South as well? Quinyon Mitchell's my favorite player. I believe he's one of the best players in the entire NFL draft. He ends up a member of the Indianapolis Colts in this mock draft, and then Terrion Arnold ends up as a member of the Jacksonville Jaguars from Alabama, the other best cornerback in this draft. It's really a pick your poison between those two guys. But those two guys ending up in the Texans division, well, it makes a lot of sense. One, they're some of the best players that are on the board right there. But also, you got to stop C.J. Stroud any way you can if you have designs on taking down the Houston Texans. So picking two of the top corners in the entire draft, the Colts and the Jaguars do in this mock draft. That adds to a little bit of the discomfort to this draft. So, again, I don't want to be talking out of both sides of my mouth. I do desire Byron Murphy for this Texans team. If he starts to slip, go get him. If you don't want to go get him, heck, I like a lot of the players that we mentioned that could be there at 42 overall for the Texans. Or, hey, jump up a couple of picks if you need to. Nick Caserio, of course, he's got the 6th-round pick to play around with. He's got the 2 4th-round picks to play around with. And then he's got all the draft capital in the future to play around with as well if he wants to get thrifty and spendy on day 2 of the NFL draft. I do worry a little bit about that elite player being there at 23. Maybe I'm overrating some of these guys and underrating others. That's kind of what Nick Caserio is banking on, that the league is underrating some of these guys that could be 2nd-round picks. What'd you make of this mock draft? Nightmare, or you sleeping nice and easy after a conversation about that? Let me know in the comment section down below. On your way down to the comment section, throw me a thumbs up on the video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Lots of conversation about the draft, the Texans, and so much more still coming your way here on the channel before the draft gets here in late April. You don't want to miss it. We got some big stuff planned for draft week, new uniform week, and so much more. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of it. Thanks for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it, and I can't wait until we talk Texans again soon.